Matt Norlander of CBS Sports. Matt, you wrote a really good piece on Michael Jordan, which I want to get to coming up in our interview. But I want to start with some Arkansas guys, Arkansas basketball. Now, we've seen different reports. I know I've looked at your mock draft. I looked at a lot of other NBA guys' mock draft as far as what we're going to have this upcoming draft. What were your overall thoughts, Matt, on Isaiah Joe in year 2 at Arkansas?
Oh, good morning, fellas. It's good to be with you, and thanks for having me. Overall, first of all, it's good to talk Arkansas hoops. We get to do it occasionally on the Ion College Basketball Podcast, but we touch on so many teams that I don't really get to zero in too much on the Hogs. Listen, I've maintained for the past 2 seasons that Isaiah Joe has been one of the more entertaining players to watch in college basketball. I think that's undeniable. Now, clearly, obviously, he didn't get to play a full season this past season. He was not quite as good on the whole as I think I probably expected him to be. He wasn't bad or anything like that. I just thought he might have been more valuable heading into the season than he actually wound up being. And I know, obviously, injury can hamper that, but, clearly Mason Jones was the team's best player, and at this point, Mason Jones, he's going to be gone for good, while Isaiah Joe is considered more 50-50, and I personally think that he should and he will return to Muss's program. But he was a solid player, obviously the kind of player who I think, my personal projection on Joe is if he returns, he's going to come back to a team that should make the NCAA tournament, and he can be the lead dog on a team and help his draft stock in the process, because I think that we will look up in 5 to 7 years and see Isaiah Joe as a nice role player kind of type in the NBA. But I do think that he would benefit by returning, probably upping his percentages, clearly increasing his usage, increasing his numbers, and in the process becoming a surefire pick in 2021, whereas I don't see that being the case this year.
Matt, we spoke early in the show. We really actually opened the show asking the question, can Isaiah Joe take that next step? Can he be the number one guy? Because 2 years ago, you had Daniel Gafford. Last year, Mason Jones was really the number one guy. Can Isaiah take that next step? I think he can. What's your opinion on if he can be the center vocal point of this Eric Musselman offense?
I think that is definitely the case if he is to come back, because it's not just the shooting is the most important aspect of it. There's no doubt about it. I think that he would clearly be the number one option. I think at that point, and yeah, I think that he has that in him. I think he is capable of being the alpha, of being Musselman's most important player, and he has the talent there overall as well. So yes, that will. And if he does come back, I think that might wind up being one of the most important factors for Arkansas on the whole when you talk about the team's chances at competing in the top tier of the SEC. It should be another good, interesting season for the SEC next season, because Kentucky will expect it to be good, but they're having humongous, greater than usual roster turnover. Florida should be, I would think Florida will be better next season. Tennessee's definitely going to be better next season. Auburn will still obviously be in the mix there, and there's some other teams as well. But I think that Arkansas is a top 4 team in the SEC if Isaiah Joe returns.
If you were in Isaiah Joe's camp and y'all were sitting down and as a group or a family trying to figure out the priorities, what's kind of the 1, 2, 3 things you're looking at? Is it money? Is it fit? Is it draft style? What are you looking at to decide whether or not to stay at Arkansas or continue down the path of the NBA draft?
What's the feedback we're getting from the other side on the NBA side? How realistic is it that I am going to be drafted? They're actually in a tough spot there because I'm of the belief that Isaiah Joe falls in a camp with about 20 other players where it's certainly possible you could be drafted, but if you do, it's on the back end, and I'm talking in the 50s. But it's just as likely you don't get drafted. And given the uncertainty surrounding next season in general, and I'm not talking for college, I'm talking for the NBA as well, how many opportunities are going to be out there for you to even play? If you had, one thing I would consider is, okay, let's say you got to look at things, every possible avenue, everything that could happen here. What if you had a situation where college basketball, even though it gets the benefit, it's the last major American sport that is scheduled to start again. Okay, so it gets to wait the longest. Everything else, doing baseball happening now, the NBA even resuming now and starting again next season, the NFL, the NHL, college football, all those will be starting their seasons before college basketball. So college basketball gets the benefit of waiting that long. But even if it still got delayed or postponed 6 weeks because of logistics with everything with this pandemic, maybe if you started in January and you had a shortened season, could that even somehow benefit you heading into next season? It's something to consider overall. But yes, money is also a factor there, and trying to get a realistic grasp on the likelihood you would be drafted and the potential you could have returning to an Arkansas team. I think, I don't have it in front of me, but I looked a couple of weeks ago. I think Arkansas's class incoming for next season was ranked 6th in the composite at 247 Sports. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it's the strongest class in ages for Arkansas. So all those things should play a factor. And for the benefit of the sport, the team, the SEC, I really hope he comes back because he's got a green light, and he's very fun to watch play.
Yeah, I think a lot of people listening agree with that. So you mentioned his draft stock right now somewhere in the upper 40s, in the 50s, in a group of players there. Another year, and he stays healthy, doesn't miss those games in the middle of the year. What's the ceiling? How high, in your opinion, could Isaiah Joe rise with another year of college?
If he was really good, if he shot north of 40% from three, shot close or better than 50% from two, was the clear lead dog on an Arkansas team that made the NCAA tournament with plenty of room to spare, I think you could have a situation a year from now, if Isaiah Joe stayed healthy, that his ceiling would be somewhere in the 25 to 30 range.
I think that's a fair assessment where he could be, and I know
the late first round.
Yeah, late first round on that. We're speaking with Matt Norlander of CBS Sports. Matt, I know you mentioned the Eye on College Basketball podcast you do with GP Gary Parrish, and I feel like I should call you Norlander since that's what he does every day, but we're not good enough friends to do that yet. But he does radio in Memphis from 4 to 6 on the ESPN station there, and Tommy and I were discussing earlier in the program the possibility of Memphis playing Arkansas in a matchup down the road with Penny and Muss having their connections, Memphis and Arkansas being so close. Do you think that's beneficial enough for Penny Hardaway and Memphis to schedule Arkansas in the future?
I think so, and listen, Parrish would know more on this because actually Parrish just had Penny on his radio show yesterday, and I just almost never talk to Penny. But given what Penny has said since he's taken the gig, he just doesn't seem like a coach who is scared about that kind of stuff, isn't worried about any previous politics with that. This applies to college football as much as college basketball. When it is such a good thing for the health and interest of the sport when you have natural geographic rivals that aren't in the same conference that are willing to play each other ideally annually, but even short of that, relatively frequently, 2 out of every 4 years, 3 out of every 6, 6 out of every 10. And for Memphis and Arkansas, there's almost no reason not to do it. And particularly, I think we will see this well established about a year or two from now. Because I think the financial impacts of all this, even though they are forecast and are seen, I think they will be realized, 21, 22, 23. And that when it comes to who you can play, geography might wind up having a real impact on that. And why wouldn't you? At this point, Memphis and Arkansas are essentially on even footing. I think playing each other would benefit both programs. The fan bases would be into it. I think both coaches certainly, they seem to see the game and what can help it in a lot of ways. They see eye to eye in that respect, and it would be terrific. Is a Memphis Arkansas game going to bring in like widespread national appeal? No, not necessarily, but it's not going to be a thing where it's only people in the region care. I mean, if you tell me that Arkansas and Memphis, we look up 2 years from now and they're playing a game and, both these teams have made NCAA tournaments. Both these teams are bringing in, 5-star recruits, have really strong classes. Like, yes, that becomes a game on a given day. And, just call it like it's going to be played on, the first Saturday of December or whatever, right? that becomes a game almost certainly if both teams are tournament caliber, like that's a top 3 game on that day. And so, yes, there would be national interest around it. It wouldn't be one of the biggest games of a season, but certainly it's a good thing. And we need more coaches and their athletic directors and their schools to be willing to do that because it inherently helps the sport. And I think sometimes ego can get in the way, which is unfortunate, but we are seeing the return of it. I mean, Kansas and Missouri in both football and basketball are now willing to do this, which is great to see. You also see, spots in college football where like Texas and Texas A&M, maybe one day they can eventually start doing it again. So, yes, I would love to see it. And I can't predict that it would happen, but I think it's more likely than not, given the 2 coaches that are at those programs right now.
Yeah, Matt, better high-profile non-conference games at neutral sites or home and home in November and December will help the sport, which right now is pretty irrelevant across most of the sports landscape in a normal world that can't get a lot of attention because of college football, NFL playoffs. Maybe some of these higher-profile non-conference games would help boost the sport in the months that nobody's paying attention.
Yeah, I fight back a little bit on that. I wouldn't say college basketball is irrelevant in November and December. It's just way further down on the pecking order. But it does. I will say this. You need more of those games. The sport has been better in the past 5 or 6 years at getting more of those interesting games. It does. It now does start with the Champions Classic to kick off the season with Duke, Kentucky, Kansas, and Michigan State, which is a big deal. I still maintain one of the biggest football weeks of the year is Thanksgiving week, and the Maui Invitational is as nearly prominent as a sporting event as we have across the American landscape. So I agree with what you're saying, but I tend to fight back on those who say college basketball doesn't mean anything or isn't relevant in November and December on a national level, because I don't find that to be entirely true. There's not as much urgency, but that's just because
opinion comes from us being in the South, hosting out of Arkansas, where the SEC is predominantly a football conference. Yeah. It's picked up in both basketball with the different coaches that have been hired. Baseball, it's always been good, but I think your perspective up in the Northeast is a lot different than ours down here in the Southeast.
Oh yeah, I mean, listen, I live up here in Connecticut, and so I actually think I have a pretty, wide national view just in terms of what I have to cover and what I see. But you are so right about that. College football in this area, it's truly a different universe. I mean, I have friends who are diehard UConn season ticket holders. Don't get me wrong.
God bless them, man. I'm sorry about that.
It's not even remotely the same. It's always been so interesting and fun to watch from afar. The absolute insanity that comes along with the passion to follow college football in particular in the South there. Hey, I have a quick question for you guys on that note, though. I don't want to hijack the interview too much, but if you gave Arkansas fans the choice between, let's say, all right, you can go to a Sweet 16 in basketball, or you could have a 10-win football season, which would they choose?
10-win football.
Yeah.
Now, here's the difference. Now, Matt, my favorite sport is basketball. I'd go basketball. I've said multiple times on this show that I'd rather win a national championship at basketball than see Arkansas win in football. But I'm obscure in that category for sure.
But understand, Matt, this is a basketball program that hasn't been to the Final Four, and you may know this, since '96. So,
well, it hasn't got to the Sweet 16 in just as long. So
what did I say? Final Four? I meant Sweet 16. I said Final. Hadn't been to the Sweet 16 since '96. Final Four was '95.
That's why I asked.
Yeah.
That is interesting, and I wonder if we look up in 5 years, if Muss has made, let's say he's made 2 Sweet 16s in that time, gotten to the tournament 4 out of 5 years, he's still there. I wonder if that might change or not. I don't know. I mean, Arkansas, from a football perspective, it just seems like just like an average, almost of an afterthought of a program on a national level. And I know I'm not trying to I know how big, you guys know, it's in just a brutal conference there, and to fight to the top of it. So, whereas in basketball, clearly the university has such a better chance at being nationally relevant and consistent in basketball. Your answer doesn't surprise me, but I was just interested nonetheless.
I think if you said Final Four in basketball versus 10-win season, it'd be a different outcome.
Yeah, because a 10-win season isn't getting to the college football playoff, and a 10-win season probably a 10-win season, is that even getting you to the SEC title game?
The last 10-win season got you third in the division here.
Exactly. So that's
or something like that.
That's quite interesting.
2011.
That's right. Yeah,
2011, you were third in the division with a 10-win season.
And Matt, the only teams that Arkansas lost to in 2011 were in the national championship: Arkansas, Alabama, and LSU. So that's the bummers of playing the SEC West in football. We're speaking with Matt Norlander of CBS Sports here on the Morning Rush. Matt, you wrote a fantastic piece, which I thought you characterized in the title of it, talking about like Michael Jordan being loved as both a hero and a villain, which is so hard to do. Like, typically when you think about athletes over the years, they're characterized as villains or they're characterized as just being heroes. But Jordan had a way about him where he was somewhere in between, and even people that weren't fans of the Bulls liked him regardless. Matt, how do you think he was able to go about doing that over the course of his career and as we see this Last Dance documentary play out?
I think there was the biggest reason why was the winning, but then along with that, there's something not replicable about Jordan and the cosmetics of his game. He was the kind of player, and I'm sure you have plenty of listeners under 30 who are just not going to. They can't. I'm 38, and my parents grew up in Chicago. I grew up in Vermont as a Bulls fan. I was the Bulls kid in my school. When you watch Jordan, like, he had the ability that when you watch games, your eyes stayed on him no matter if he had the ball or if he didn't. There was just an utter magnetism to him that was irresistible. And I think it actually came mostly from the way that he played. Like, I don't even, like, in today's age, when you have people who are fans or, to use like modern slang, like stans of these players, I think a lot of it can emanate not just from how they play, but who they play for, their appearance and what they do on social media, how they are branded. Yes, Jordan had connections to Gatorade and Nike and McDonald's. That certainly played a part, but it was a completely different era, and it almost felt like that stuff was truly auxiliary. And sure, he helped move product, there's no doubt about it, but it was almost entirely based around this player looked like no other player we had ever seen, played in a major market. Once he got to the ultimate stage, he was going to win. He did have, he was the next in line of, it became a common theme where you kind of hit a ceiling. You'd lose to a certain team in the conference semis, and then you might lose in the conference championship before you got to the finals and broke through. Like, he had lost, and we had seen him lose, and then he just continues to dominate to the point where, like, I live up here in Connecticut, so obviously I have a number of friends who are Knicks fans, and even they're just like, man, I hated him, but I loved watching the Bulls and watching those teams. It's just, there's no other athlete in American history. No, none. You can point to any athlete who's hated, and they're not as loved as much, or vice versa. It didn't matter. No matter what Jordan did, his approval rating was just sky high, and that's still the case today. Like, the most absurd thing, I heard this earlier in the week, it's like Jordan shoes outsell every shoe sold by Under Armour combined. He outsells all of the other current NBA players. His shoes. He hasn't played for 17 years. It's just absolutely crazy. And I thought that the past two episodes of The Last Dance really showed how he balanced that hero and villain, even in a comic way. My column at CBSSports.com starts with the fact that, like, when you watch him responding and reacting to Gary Payton, like, he's coming off like a little bit of a madman. Like, he's cackling and laughing at Payton, who, by the way, did a good job on him in the 96 finals. And instead of our reaction being like, Jordan's a sociopath, he's misremembering this, Gary Payton easily held him to his worst finals performance of his career. Instead, it's like, oh my gosh, look at what Jordan's doing, clowning Gary Payton. Is this not amazing? Is this not awesome? He just has an effect on the general psyche of the sports fan that is unmatched of any athlete before. And given the way that we watch and consume and talk about sports now in so many different ways, I just don't think anyone else can ever do it again.
Matt Norlander, CBS Sports. You can find his work there. You can listen to his podcast with Gary Parrish on college basketball. Matt, we really appreciate your time this morning, bud.
Thanks, fellas. Appreciate it. Have a great day.